Paper was like gold in medieval times.
Oh, not tobacco. Sugar.
That everything we thought we knew about the world might turn out to be completely wrong.
Distracted by the finer things in life. He looks shattered and he's broke. And all you have to do is find that guy who's perfect for you. And the fine line between wrong and right.
The trust we give medical professionals is born out of a belief that they have a duty to care and protect. But trust can be abused.
Someone so bubbly and full of life is gone.
It's not realistic to suggest she took it herself.
It's just nonsense.
You can't put your finger on it, but you know something's not straightforward.
When a nurse dies suddenly after a night out with colleagues, the only conclusion can be that it was just a tragic accident. Or was there a more sinister explanation? Susan Annis worked as a nurse in Crawley Hospital's A&E department. In 1994, Jo Lashwood had only just qualified as a nurse herself when she first met Susan.
I wish I had more photos, but those 90s, we just didn't take that many pictures like we do today. That's quite sad, really. Sue was then a senior staff nurse and she was allocated as my mentor, so she immediately took me under her wing. She was a very bubbly person, always smiling, laughing, chatty. Very attractive. She was tall, she was slim, and everyone liked her. You couldn't not like her, really.
Susan's parents, Audrey and David, remember she showed an interest in nursing from a very young age.
That is a lovely picture of Susan.
That's really lovely, that.
Yeah, it's a lovely picture of her.
Well, Audrey used to help out at an old people's home, and Susan used to go with you.
I did think she'd make a good nurse.
With a dancing class. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I used to take her to the ballet, and she decided that she'd be a ballet dancer, but she was going to be a nurse. So she was fighting between the two. She chose nursing.
By 1996, Susan, now 31, had become a sister in the busy emergency department in Crawley Hospital.
Shifts were just notoriously chaotic, but Sue ran the shift and it worked. The roof could be falling in and Sue would still be running around, making sure patients were well looked after.
She really enjoyed life, worked hard, and she played hard.
We were quite similar. We were kind of rock chicks. We liked our Aerosmith, our Def Leppard, Metallica. We liked our dancing, our parties, our cider. We talked about our boyfriends and fond memories.
Dr. John Parsley had got to know Susan when they both started working in the hospital within weeks of each other.
Working nights. I was living in Brighton. I'd pick her up in Haywards Heath and then go to Crawley and then take her back in the morning on my way home. In the casualty departments, because of the type of work, you find there's very strong bonds between all the staff.
During busy shifts, Susan started complaining of heart palpitations.
We would say, look, lay down, let's stick a cardiac monitor on you and see what's going on. It showed that she'd gone into a rhythm called supraventricular tachycardia, which is commonly referred to as SVT, which is a problem with the electrical impulses in the heart, which makes the heart beat extra fast. And it would just spontaneously revert back to normal. It just seemed to last a few minutes or a few seconds at times and then just stop. So she was aware of it and we were aware of it.
When she first had it, she was almost bragging about it. You know, look what I've got, sort of thing. But she settled down and she realised that she had to take things at a pace slower. But that didn't stop her doing anything.
Nobody said to her, you've got to get that urgently dealt with. They just said, well, you've got to get that sorted.
After some years, Jo left Crawley Hospital to work in Liverpool. At this time, Susan was in a happy relationship, and Jo felt she was leaving behind a friend whose life was very much on the up, personally and professionally.
I had a leaving do, and Sue came to that, and yeah, I just moved on, and you just assume you're going to see people again. It just didn't occur that it would ever be the end.
In the autumn of 1996, Susan Annis was on a course at the Royal Brompton in Chelsea as part of her paediatric diploma, and to help her fulfil her dream of creating a separate children's area within Crawley Hospital's A&E department.
She hated the lack of facilities for children.
So that it could be separated from, say, the drunks who sometimes came into the A&E department.
She told the hospital that they should do something, and they said, you do it.
So she was sent up on this children's nursing course.
Well, she was very intelligent, she was very academic. It was a new role, and it's very important to the A&E department, and we all supported her on it.
Susan made friends with a number of other nurses on the course, including 35-year-old Kevin Cobb, who was based at St Peter's Hospital in Chertsey. Dr. John Parsley had met him before when he had previously worked there.
Kevin Cobb, he was a nurse in the casualty, perfectly proficient at his job. He didn't stand out from the crowd in any way. He was just straight down the middle. And the only thing Sue said, that he was struggling on the course, and the rest of the class were concerned about that. You know, nicely concerned. No backbiting or anything like that.
From all accounts, Susan Annis was popular, warm, supportive to her friends, and just somebody who seemed to be beloved by the people she was surrounded by.
Susan had a bright and exciting future, but one fateful encounter would bring it all tragically to an end.
Susan Annis was on a course at the Royal Brompton Hospital. She was staying in a nursing home type building in Chelsea. She went for some drinks and a pizza with some colleagues.
After the meal, Susan and new friend Kevin Cobb were having a drink together back at their quarters.
She was drinking cider. Her heart went into irregular beats and she collapsed. Kevin Cobb panicked and tried to administer CPR and called other members of staff, and they tried to save her life, but unfortunately she died.
One night, knock on the front door, and there was a policeman to tell us that Susan had passed away. We were just told that she'd had some sort of heart attack.
Some friends who worked in Crawley Hospital came down to Brighton, where I was living, and said that she had died. And they didn't have any more information than that.
It was a sudden death, and there were obviously going to be lots of questions, but it was just shock of it. At the age of 31, you don't expect someone, especially someone like Sue, to die. It passed my mind whether it was something to do with the heart complaint that she'd had. That was the only illness I could think of. Just disbelief, really, that someone that's so bubbly and full of life had it all and then is gone suddenly.
And of course, everybody's upset, but there's this gap in the knowledge of what's really happened.
Susan's sudden death inevitably raised many questions. Was it a tragic accident? Or was it something more suspicious? In February 1997, 3 months after Susan had died, an inquest into her sudden death began.
I went to the inquest at the Westminster Coroner's Court with Sue's family. Her GP would not normally go to an inquest. He went as well. There's something where you can't put your finger on it, but you know something's not straightforward. Because why would all these people be going?
The post-mortem included a toxicology report that found Susan had traces of the anaesthetic drug midazolam in her system.
I looked at her GP and we both looked at each other and were astounded. It was in her blood and her stomach. This is odd. This is not the normal thing.
The inquest into the unexplained death of 31-year-old nurse Susan Annis revealed she had remains of a medical drug in her blood and stomach. But how had it got there?
Midazolam is used for invasive procedures. It doesn't knock you out like an anaesthetic, but what it does do, you have sort of an out-of-body experience and you don't feel any pain. Depending on how much of a dose you get, it makes it difficult for you to recall what has happened during the invasive procedure.
So if you've had something unpleasant done, you won't remember a thing. It works very rapidly, within a minute or so. It's very, very quick. In its proper place, it's an excellent drug.
But for somebody like Susan, who had a heart condition and was also drinking alcohol, it would have been a risky one to use.
Very odd to be in her stomach. She would have ingested it, and Sue didn't take drugs.
The coroner discussed this with a doctor, and he had said she probably took this midazolam to help her to sleep. Well, this doctor obviously didn't know exactly what midazolam was used for, and the coroner hadn't bothered to consult anybody else. It was ridiculous. Nobody in the nursing profession would have used it.
Never known her to take any sleeping tablets, even when she was on nights.
Midazolam wasn't particularly a drug that you would take yourself. It just didn't make sense why she would have that.
The coroner actually dismissed that a cause of death could be midazolam. After hearing all the evidence, the medical records, he directed that the cause of death was from an irregular heartbeat.
It was assumed to be natural causes. That was it. The inquest didn't solve it, so there was an open verdict. In effect, the open verdict means there is no verdict. And surely it should lead on to further investigation of what had gone on, but it didn't.
So that was it.
There was this bad vibe. It was most peculiar. Most peculiar.
When you know something just isn't right, it can be really hard to shake that feeling. However, Susan's friends and family had to do just that and try and get back to some form of normality.
The coroner had made his ruling and we just got on with grieving for Sue. We weren't very happy, but what else could we do? But John Parsley wouldn't let it lie. He was very close to Sue and very upset about her death. He couldn't believe that there wasn't any cause, any definite cause.
He simply couldn't let it go, and I think on 2 counts. 1, he knew her, and 2, he had medical knowledge. And putting those 2 parts of information together simply didn't add up for him. So he had a bit between his teeth going, I have to get to the bottom of this because it simply doesn't make sense to me.
I decided to ring the poison centre at Guy's Hospital. And I said, this drug midazolam, when it's swallowed, does it have a different effect when it's injected? And he said, I can get it all sent through to you.
The article from the Poison Centre gave John crucial information. When midazolam is swallowed and the liver processes it, a byproduct is created called hydroxymidazolam.
It's an active drug, so you've got to add that level to the level of the midazolam. You add the 2 together, and that gives you the true level when you've swallowed it.
This higher level of midazolam would have been possibly life-threatening for Susan.
I wrote to the coroner, gave him an explanation, said this needs measuring, and he measured it, but didn't do anything. He said this takes us no further. So nothing happened.
John just couldn't believe that Susan, a highly trained nurse, would have willingly used such a drug that was not only dangerous, but also difficult to take.
At the time, the midazolam in the UK was only available in the injectable form, so it came in glass ampoules. So if you wanted to swallow it, you would have to break open the glass ampoules. But if you're a professional person, it would not be your first choice. Even if you didn't have the alcohol and you didn't have a heart condition, you still wouldn't take that one. You would take something in tablet form and swallow it. If you've taken it to sleep, why aren't the ampoules there? Because it works very quickly. So it had to be used very near to where she died. And it's not realistic to suggest she took it herself.
It's just nonsense.
John suspected something more disturbing had gone on, but the open verdict remained on Susan's death.
There's no way someone is going to end up with midazolam in their stomach and in their blood unless really someone else gave it to them. But you feel in a way that you can't do anything about it because you don't have the resources to do it.
Frustratingly, it seemed Susan's friends and family would get no answers. John didn't want to raise false hope, so hadn't told her parents, David and Audrey, about what he had discovered and the coroner's reaction. Susan's funeral had taken place before the inquest.
The crematorium was absolutely packed. Her friends, her family, doctors, nurses, ambulance crew. There was tall strapping paramedics crying. It was just really sad. But it was very Sue. We walked in and the music playing was Def Leppard, Pour Some Sugar on Me, Baby. And it was very Sue, and it was a lovely service. It was just overwhelmingly sad. Kevin Cobb was there at the front of the crematorium with Sue's parents. They were thanking him for attempting to resuscitate Sue and for what he'd done.
The years passed after Susan's death, and in April 1998, the Children's A&E unit was opened at Crawley General Hospital and dedicated to her memory.
I returned to Crawley back working with John and the rest of the team, and we always talked about Sue, the sadness of her death and the suddenness. It was all unexplained still.
She wasn't forgotten, but I suppose you would say life carries on there, you know.
In that same year, out of the blue, a passing comment suddenly brought the mystery to John's attention once again.
It happened to be on Sue's birthday. By pure coincidence, it was as if somebody had said, right, enough is enough, we're going to sort this out. I was invited to a retirement party. It was a nursing sister who was retiring at Chertsey, where Kevin Cobb had been working. She said, have you heard about Kevin? She said, I don't think there's anything in it. She said, but he's meant to have raped someone in casualty. And I said, well, it's impossible because it's so busy. People are walking in and out all the time. You're not left alone for that period of time. And she said, yes, but the funny thing is, the police say there was midazolam in her system.
It was still early days, but it looked like the truth behind Susan's tragic death may finally come to light.
But I can't remember whether I said this or actually just thought it. He definitely did it.
After hearing that male nurse Kevin Cobb had been accused of sexually assaulting somebody in hospital, John Parsley wanted the unexplained death of his friend and colleague, nurse Susan Annis, reinvestigated.
I rang the police and I said, what they might like to do is Westminster Coroner's Court, early 97, the case of Susan Annis. I just wanted them to just look at it, because when they look at it, if they're of suitable experience, they're going to get it straight away. A few days later, Jim Dickey rang me.
A detective inspector at the time, Jim Dickey was working with the Met's murder squad, but had been reallocated to oversee the case of Kevin Cobb and investigate the possibility he was a serial rapist.
Kevin Cobb allegedly had assaulted 3 female patients at St Peter's Hospital. 2 of the victims made allegations of indecent assault or rape when they had been administered midazolam by Kevin Cobb. One of them, I think, remembered it quite clearly because the dosage she was given wasn't sufficient to knock her out properly. Another one vaguely remembered that something wasn't right about the procedure that she'd undergone, and they reported it to the police. A third one came forward as a result of a police appeal.
Sometimes people who enter the caring profession exploit the persona of caring, but actually what's going on underneath them is a real need to have power, control, and the attention of others.
It was in the middle of the rape investigation into Cobb that Jim heard about John Parsley's call to the police.
He believed that Susan's death was suspicious and may have been caused at the hands of Kevin Cobb. I looked at it and thought, yes, this is suspicious. I don't agree with the coroner's findings either.
The inquest believed Susan's death was most likely due to her heart condition, but never really accounted for the midazolam found in her system. Jim wanted to re-examine the evidence, but he knew 2 years on, the chances of any forensic material remaining was slim.
The pathologist would have removed Susan's stomach contents, bagged them up forensically and sent them off to a toxicologist.
Jim tracked down the toxicologist who'd received them at Charing Cross Hospital.
I said, you haven't by any chance got Susan Annis's stomach contents still, have you? She paused for a second and said, I always thought this case was suspicious. Just let me have a look and see if it's in my fridge. And I was left hanging on the phone in great anticipation of what the answer was going to be. She came back 5 minutes later and said, yes, we've still got it.
It was an incredible stroke of luck. Clearly, it wasn't just family and friends that believed that Susan's death was suspicious.
The toxicologist found midazolam in Susan's stomach contents, but wasn't happy with what the coroner directed and disagreed with it. And that's why she had kept the stomach contents. You have to bear in mind they haven't got a huge amount of storage, and it has to be kept forensically sealed, and it has to be refrigerated.
Susan's stomach contents were reanalysed at a police forensic science lab.
There was midazolam in a sufficient amount to cause heart palpitations. We consulted with two eminent professors, and they said, in their view, without a doubt, it would have caused Susan to collapse and die.
Jim believed Kevin Cobb spiked Susan's cider with midazolam. He phoned John Parsley to let him know that his efforts to uncover the truth about his friend's death had finally paid off.
He said, well, between us two, I believe she's murdered. Belief. Somebody's dealing with it, and they're believing things.
No ifs or buts, it was a murder investigation, because I strongly believe to this day Kevin Cobb caused, recklessly or deliberately, the death of Susan Annis in order to stupefy her to have sexual relations with her.
Any parent would want answers as to what had really happened to their child, so it was important for the police to inform Susan's parents about what they had uncovered.
One of the most harrowing and also satisfying tasks I had as the investigating officer was to tell Susan's parents that Susan's death was suspicious. When we told them that we'd reopen the investigation, it was like a huge cloud had been lifted off their shoulders. And it was palatable. I could actually physically feel it.
Almost relief, because I felt I knew that Susan hadn't died naturally. But I knew that this man had done it.
Jim believed they had sufficient grounds to get Cobb into custody.
Early in the morning, we knocked on the door. Kevin Cobb answered it. I said, "You're under arrest for murder." And he went white and he tried to shut the door. I pushed him back and we entered the house, and I said, "We're going to search it now."
I just would love to have seen his face when you've got away with it for 2 years and suddenly, out of the blue, the police are on your doorstep and arresting you.
It was that stage I realised that Kevin Cobb's wife was present. We sat her down, explained why we were there. We then searched the house and we found no midazolam. We found other drugs, but again, that's not hugely surprising, bearing in mind his wife was a doctor. There were no dangerous drugs there that I can recall.
However, the police already had some forensic evidence against Cobb as a result of the ongoing rape investigation.
Surrey Police, when they received the complaints from female patients, the police attended the hospital and took his trousers and smock from him. And on the smock, and I think in the pockets, were traces of midazolam. And they did an inventory of the midazolam stock and found that there were capsules missing.
In a police interview, officers grilled Cobb about the death of Susan Annis and the rape allegations.
He, of course, didn't admit any of it, but it was put to him in very strong terms that his justification for this was his sexual deviancy. He didn't say yes and he didn't say no.
Susan had been a much-loved member of the nursing community, and it had been hard for anyone to understand how she had died. Now detectives had a lead. Another nurse. But who was Kevin Cobb?
Subsequently, other nurses came forward. He was described as being quite a lazy nurse. He did what he had to do. He was in his mid-30s. He was a staff nurse, and by all accounts, he was frustrated and thought he was worthy of further promotions. And in fact, one nurse told us that he was into what she termed risky sex. She had sex with him on hospital wards, in cupboards, in a hospital, all that sort of stuff. So I think he's very controlling, very manipulative, and what he wanted he got by administrating drugs to patients and colleagues.
It's all to do with power, and these women, who are professional women, who got careers, they're getting on with life, are confident, they're the ones he picks on.
Think about drugging someone and then assaulting them. You are taking away all their, their rights, their power and their control, and you're imposing yourself on them, and there's nothing they can do about it. Now, that might speak to someone who actually may have very low self-esteem. Anybody who has to make somebody feel this big or render them helpless in order to feel self-worth doesn't feel great about themselves.
As a nurse, we're there to look after patients. We have a duty of care to protect from harm. And the thought that he'd been drugging and raping these women in A&E whilst on duty, it was unthinkable. It made me feel sick. Poor Sue didn't know what he was like. He'd given Sue the drug to rape her. Unfortunately, she died. And then a couple of years later, he's still drugging people. What kind of person would do that?
Kevin Cobb, a male nurse, had been accused of drugging and sexually assaulting 3 women in hospital. Now he had been arrested on suspicion of murdering nurse Susan Annis over 2 years earlier. The evidence was all pointing at Kevin Cobb. But had he meant to kill Susan?
His version of events was she had a can of cider, I think he had a beer. Didn't mention that he'd administered midazolam. But we proved he did because it was in her stomach contents. How else would it have got there? Susan Annis and Kevin Cobb were alone, so everyone's pretty unsure how long it took for him to react to the fact that she'd gone into a heart seizure and how long it took for him to call for help. He clearly panicked, but how many minutes went by? What did he do with the evidence that he had? Did he dispose of it before he called someone else? And I think he did. There is residue left after you break a capsule and put the liquid in a cider can. Where was that? Police never found it. And that takes time to dispose of those things. He tried to cover his tracks. Fortunately, he couldn't get to Susan's stomach contents.
If you put something in someone's drink and they've already got a heart condition, which you probably know about, she's an open person, so everybody knew she had it. It wasn't a secret. Midazolam and the alcohol, they both will affect your breathing. It's reckless. It's dangerous to do that. He didn't care enough. He doesn't care if it risks your life. At the funeral, Audrey had thanked him for being there when Sue had died. I think Even now, if you ask her about that, she'd find that, you know, really hard to take. That she actually thanked him, yeah, for being there. That she didn't die alone.
What we see at Susan's funeral is a real display of cockiness. There he is, apparently showing empathy and caring and tears. Somebody who's almost thinking, I know something you don't, and I've put myself in the spotlight at the heart of your grief as if I'm a caring person, but I'm not.
Jim Dickey was determined that Cobb would not get away with his multiple crimes.
I arrested him for murder. We sent the papers to the Crown Prosecution Service, and counsel said there is a question mark over whether he knew that she had an underlying health problem. Basically, it could have been an accident caused by his actions without the intent of trying to kill her.
Jim Dickey said if we put it as manslaughter, we can get it all tried in one go.
He was charged with manslaughter, administering a stupefying drug, i.e. the midazolam, on Susan and the 3 other female victims. He was charged with a rape, an attempted rape, and sexual assault. Kevin Cobb pleaded not guilty to all charges.
Charging Susan's killer with manslaughter was disappointing, but all that really mattered was that Kevin Cobb was brought to justice, ending years of torment for her loved ones.
We had a police officer who came with us every morning up to the Old Bailey for the trial.
And they were there for us and to give us support.
Yep.
And that's what they did, didn't
Yep.
they? Absolutely fantastic.
I took a glance at Cobb, and I think it's just his demeanour. I don't think, but he was like smirking.
He sat in the court and grinned at everyone. He'd sort of sit and go like this, and he must have thought he knew what I'd like to do with him. Cocky.
We didn't know him as an individual person, and he was just cocky in the court. Yes, he was most objectionable.
You could feel the tension in the court.
There was one woman who gave very good evidence. She was in A&E, and Kevin Cobb had given her this drug. It didn't really sedate her so much. So she was, although she was partly sedated, she was very much awake to what was going on as it happened. And he raped her, and she remembered all the details about what he'd done to her. And her evidence at the trial was so powerful.
She said, "Why are you doing this to me?" And he said, "Oh, you can remember this now, but you won't later." But she did.
It's incredibly hard to report sexual assault because it's such a violation of a human being. And you've been exposed, humiliated, somebody has, literally inflicted their control over you. And then to come forward and have to reveal all that takes an enormous amount of strength.
The jury, I don't think were out that long. Unfortunately for Cobb, I think the majority were women. And they saw through his lies.
After a 4-week trial, Kevin Cobb was found guilty of all charges. He was given 7 life sentences.
Cobb did look upset at that stage. So it had hit him then.
Justice had been served at last. But imagine if Cobb had administered a larger quantity of midazolam to his final victim. He might have escaped conviction altogether.
I don't know how this man, who's a nurse, could do such an evil thing. But how can you do that? He took away an intelligent, loving, caring girl. He took part away of both of us.
Unfortunately, Sue happened to be his target. Sue would have been happy he was convicted and sent to prison because that's where he belonged. He's a disgusting nurse and a disgusting human being.
Kevin Cobb was convicted of manslaughter, 2 counts of rape, and 4 of administering drugs with the intention of committing sexual assault.
Audrey was very pleased about the fact that he wouldn't be able to do it to other women.
We're so grateful that John Parsley was Susan's colleague and got the police to follow things up. Otherwise, without John Parsley, Susan would have been declared a natural death, and that would have been the end of it.
You do your bit, and then that's what you can do, isn't it? And it's for other people to move it on and deal with it as they think fit.
Considering it was over 2 years between when Susan was attacked and when Kevin Cobb was caught, you have to wonder if he attacked more women.
I think Kevin Cobb is a serial offender, and I think there are many more victims out there. And granted, a lot of them may not know they were victims.
With midazolam, it causes amnesia. It doesn't stay long in the blood. So unless these women have flashbacks with any evidence, he's a menace to women.
Kevin Cobb served 15 years in prison before he was released.
Cobb is out now. Susan's dead. He might be on the sexual offenders register, but life, in my view, should mean life. But Kevin Cobb will no longer practice as a nurse.
It's nearly 25 years since Susan Annis died, and her legacy survives with her family and friends.
She was very driven. She would have gone further. She was in a happy relationship. She could have had family, children, and it's just sad that she's just not here to see all that. And here I am still working in emergency nursing, but now as a senior nurse myself. Sue was the beginning of that, and things I do now, I do think of Sue because she mentored me well.
She's not forgotten. She's still remembered with affection. And of course, when I do see Mr. and Mrs. Annis, when I go round there, her pictures are everywhere. And of course, I do talk about her. They want their child to be remembered. They don't want a photograph book with one person cut out.